The morning light over the diner parking lot had the color of tin and smoke, soft yet cold, stretching long shadows across cracked pavement. The engines of 6 motorcycles broke that quiet for a moment, rumbling low and steady like a heartbeat. When the riders cut their engines, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Troy Stone swung his leg off his Harley, the movement practiced but slow, his knees reminding him that even steel wears down with time. He adjusted his gloves, ready for the usual breakfast ritual inside Rosie's diner, the kind that steadied a man before another week of repairs and miles. Then he saw the girl. She was standing near the far curb, a thin figure in oversized clothes that hung from her small frame. Her shoes looked borrowed, the soles separating from the fabric, and her hands were clenched around a rope leash that was too rough for a child's skin. Beside her sat a golden retriever, ribs sharp against dull fur, head drooping but eyes alert. Both of them looked too quiet, too still for a Saturday morning. Troy's instincts from years on the road made him stop without thinking. The wind carried the smell of frying bacon and bitter coffee, but in that moment all he could see was hunger. The girl looked up when she heard his boots scrape the asphalt. Her eyes were green, the kind that might have been bright once, but now were dulled by exhaustion. Her lips parted, and her voice came out in a dry, cracking whisper. "Take my puppy, Sia, please." The words trembled, like they had been rehearsed all night. Troy blinked once, unsure if he had heard her right. The dog's tail gave a weak attempt at a wag, then stilled again. The girl's fingers trembled on the leash. Up close, he could see that it was braided from old clothesline, the kind you'd find behind apartment buildings. On one of the strands, faded black marker spelled out 4 uneven words. Olivia's best friend. His chest tightened. He crouched down slowly, careful not to scare her. "Why the dog, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice softer than the gravel under his boots. Her chin quivered as she tried to answer. "He hasn't eaten in 3 days," she said. Her breath hitched. "We haven't either." The words came small but steady, like she had already accepted the shame of saying them out loud. She looked down at the dog again. "I can't watch him die because we're poor." Behind Troy, one of the bikes ticked as the engine cooled, the sound clicking through the air like a clock. He had seen pain in his life, pain that came with bullets, with loss, with the kind of memories that stayed under the skin. But this was something different. This was small, innocent, rough. He looked at the dog again and saw loyalty in its tired eyes, something that refused to give up even when everything else had. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Olivia," she said after a pause. "Olivia Miller." "All right, Olivia Miller," Troy said, keeping his voice steady. "Where's your mom?" "In the car," she whispered, pointing to a silver Honda Civic parked under the diner's flickering sign. The car looked like it had lived too many lives. Windows fogged, trunk heavy with black trash bags, a blanket draped over the steering wheel. "She's sleeping. She's tired all the time. We live there now." Her gaze dropped back to the dog. "Please, take him. He's the only thing we have left, but I can't watch him starve." Troy turned to look at the car. Through the windshield, he could see a woman slumped against the driver's seat, her skin pale even through the glass. Something bright caught the light on the dashboard. A hospital wristband. His jaw tightened. The other bikers had fallen completely silent. Rev stood beside his bike, watching carefully. Doc, the older one with gray at his temples, had already pulled his sunglasses down. Tiny, who wasn't tiny at all, shifted his stance, the leather of his jacket creaking. Troy turned back to the girl. "Nobody's taking your dog, Olivia," he said. Her eyes widened, confusion flickering in them. "But I thought," he shook his head. "Nobody's taking him. But I need names. Who did this to your family?" She hesitated, the question too heavy for someone her age. "You'll take care of him?" she asked, voice trembling. "You'll make sure he eats?" "I will," Troy said, "but you've got to tell me who made you stand here today." She drew a shaky breath. Then the story spilled out. "My dad worked at a place called Mason Logistics. His boss, Mr. Pritchard, fired him when he got sick, said he was unreliable. Then our landlord, Mr. Morrison, raised the rent, said the building was getting fixed up and we had to leave if we couldn't pay. Mommy tried, but we couldn't. We sold everything. Then Daddy had to stay in the hospital, and they said the insurance didn't work anymore." As she spoke, Troy felt something inside him settle into cold clarity. He had heard too many versions of this story from people on the edge, families who fell through cracks that were made wide on purpose. He looked at Doc, who had already started typing something on his phone, fingers moving fast. "Doc," Troy said quietly, "check property records for a Frank Morrison. See if he's tied to Mason Logistics." Doc gave a single nod without looking up. Tiny leaned closer, voice low. "Want me to wake the mom?" "Gently," Troy said. "She's running on fume." Reva nodded and walked toward the Civic. Slow, hands visible. Olivia watched him, eyes wide. "You're not mad at me?" she asked suddenly, small voice breaking the silence. Troy crouched again, eye level with her. "Sweetheart, I'm only mad at the people who made you think you had to do this." She made a soft sound, half sob, half relief. The dog's tail brushed against her leg. Troy reached into his jacket, pulled out a protein bar, and tore it in half. He set one piece in front of the dog and handed the other to Olivia. She shook her head. "It's okay. Buddy first." "Buddy?" he asked. "That's his name," she said. "I braided his leash when we had to move into the car. He used to sleep by my bed. Now he just gets cold." Troy looked again at the leash, the little knotwork and the faded writing. It wasn't just a leash. It was history. He placed the bar closer to the dog. Buddy sniffed once, then began to eat. Slow, deliberate, as if remembering how. Olivia smiled weakly through tears. "Doc," Troy said, not turning his head, "tell me you found something." Doc's eyes narrowed at the screen. "Got it," he said finally. "Frank Morrison's company manages multiple buildings, including the one on Maple Street. Mason Logistics shows up as one of his major tenants. Guess what? Gerald Pritchard, the owner of Mason, is listed as Morrison's brother-in-law on tax records." Troy said nothing at first. The words hung in the air like heat before a storm. "That's not coincidence," he said finally. "No," Doc replied. "It's a business model." Rev was helping Sarah out of the car now. Her steps were unsteady, her face drawn from hunger and exhaustion. The moment she saw Olivia surrounded by bikers, panic flashed across her face. "Please," she said, voice breaking. "We don't have anything. Leave us alone." Troy raised both hands, palms open. "Ma'am, your daughter's safe. She was trying to give us her dog so you could eat." The words landed like a weight, and Sarah froze, her shoulders sagged. Olivia ran to her, clutching her sleeve. "Mommy, they're helping." Something shifted then, a small crack in the despair. Sarah's eyes filled, but her chin lifted. She looked at Troy and whispered, "Why?" "Because nobody should have to choose between feeding their child and keeping their dog alive," Troy said, "and because the people who did this to you picked the wrong family to break." For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of a spoon clinking against a cup came faintly from inside the diner. The sunlight hit the chrome of the bikes, scattering small flashes of light across the pavement. Troy straightened, his voice calm but certain. "Doc, Rev, Tiny," he said. "Get them food, water, and somewhere warm. Then we start with those names." Rosie, watching through the diner window, caught his eye. She didn't need an explanation. She nodded once and began stacking plates. Olivia knelt beside Buddy, pressing her face into his neck. The dog leaned against her, tail thumping once in quiet relief. Troy watched them for a moment longer, then turned toward his crew. "Nobody's taking Buddy," he said, "but someone's about to lose everything they stole." The engines of the bikes rumbled again, soft and low, like a storm building in the distance. The air carried the smell of motor oil and dust, and the faint cry of seagulls from somewhere beyond the highway. For the first time in a long time, Troy Stone felt something fierce and clean burn in his chest. It wasn't anger. It was purpose, and that purpose had a name. The shift from the parking lot to the booth happened without commotion, like a tide turning while the shore stayed still. Rev guided Sarah to the red vinyl seat by the window, the one patched with a neat cross of tape, and set a warm mug under her hand. Olivia hovered between the edge of the booth and the dog, unwilling to let the leash fall slack. Troy solved that for her by kneeling and curling his fingers under Buddy's jaw, steadying the weight of a loyal head. "Buddy stays where you can see him," he said, voice low and certain. "You sit, warm up." Olivia moved only when Buddy nudged her calf, as if the dog granted permission first. Tiny planted himself near the door, a patient wall in leather. Doc slid into the opposite side of the booth, with a notepad that already held the promise of order. His phone face down, so the glass would not reflect panic back at Sarah. The diner breathed around them. The air carried the smell of coffee, bacon fat, and the clean bite of dish soap. Somewhere in the kitchen a fryer shivered and settled. Somewhere closer, a spoon tapped porcelain in a rhythm too small to notice, unless your nerves were tuned for waiting. Troy rested his forearm on the divider and watched the table the way he watched a troublesome engine, careful to let the people at the booth set the pace. "Permission to ask a few questions," Doc said, his tone soft as a folded napkin. "You can stop me at any point." Sarah nodded without looking up. The heat from the mug traveled into her fingers and sat there, convincing them to stop shaking. "Go ahead." Doc angled his pen. "Your full name? Any number we can try later." "The building address before the car, Sarah Miller," she said. "The phone is off. Maple Street, apartment 3C. "Landlord's name?" Doc asked. "Frank Morrison." Doc wrote like he already had those words in a list and needed to underline them. He turned the notepad and slid it across the table. "I am going to write down some phrases. Tell me if anything matches exactly." He wrote with a care that left no room for flourish. "Failure to maintain performance standards. Market rate adjustment. Improvements required." He did not tilt his head like a man leading a witness. He let the ink sit there and waited. Sarah looked at the words as if they were strangers who had been sitting in her kitchen all along. She pointed to the first phrase, tapping once. "That one, in my husband's letter." Troy felt his jaw find its seat. "Do you have the letter with you?" "In the car," she said. "With the rest." "Rev," Troy said, not raising his voice, "I will bring the file box." Rev answered, already standing. He paused, looking toward Sarah's shoulders. "Blanket as well." "The good one," Troy said. Rev nodded and slipped out. The door chimed and let in a narrow draft. Tiny shifted half a step, body between the cold and the booth, and the draft folded harmlessly back into the doorway. Rosie did not ask what anyone wanted. 2 plates arrived as if gravity had delivered them. Stacked pancakes shaped by memory, eggs and hash browns pressed into order by the flat side of a spatula, and a metal bowl set on the floor near Buddy's paws. Rosie's knuckles tapped the edge of a plate, and then she was gone, the soft squeak of her shoes disappearing behind the counter. Olivia stared at the food like it might rise on a gust of air and vanish. She did not lift her fork until Buddy leaned forward and took a careful bite, as if checking the world for trap. Only then did she taste a corner of pancake, eyes still on the dog. Sarah tried to refuse the plate with the automatic politeness of someone who has been told no, so often it becomes muscle memory. Rosie ignored the refusal, the way someone ignores a smoke alarm in a kitchen when they already know what pan is to blame. Doc slid a napkin closer and brought the world back to the table. When did Michael receive the letter? 2 weeks after he collapsed, Sarah said. They called it unreliability. He asked for desk work. They said there was none. Insurance. Cut off the same day. She said, we appealed. They sent another letter. The same sentence, failure to maintain. Doc wrote faster, then slowed himself on purpose. The way you ease a throttle to keep an engine from running too hot. He set the pen down and rubbed the bridge of his nose. We will need copies of every document. We will also want the number off his hospital wristband to request his chart. Sarah's hand moved to her wrist by instinct, then fell back. Troy glanced through the window at the car. He had seen the thin band glinting on the dash. He gave the smallest nod toward the lot. Rev would know what that meant. Olivia set her fork down and leaned her cheek against Buddy's head. She did not close her eyes. She was learning the world again through watching. Troy met that look with steady breath. He did not move closer. He did not step away. He let her learn the shape of him from right there. Rent increase. Doc said, shaping the next step. When and how much? The week after the letter, Sarah said. Morrison pushed a notice under the door. He raised it by almost half. He wrote that improvements were coming. He wrote about market rate. Did improvements arrive? There was paint in the hallway and a new lock on the basement door. She said, the heat still hammered at night. Other tenants received similar notices. Sarah nodded. 2 doors down. An older couple got one. The man's leg is bad. He stopped waving because he could not carry his pride and his groceries at the same time. They left a few days before we did. Doc wrote one word and underlined it. Pattern. The door chimed again. Rev returned with a cracked plastic file box hugged to his chest and a folded blanket under his arm. He set the box on the table as if it were a sleeping child and eased the lid off. He turned it so the contents faced Sarah. She did not hesitate. Pay stubs, appointment cards, a school flyer, and then the letter, pulled carefully free by the corner. The paper had gone soft from being handled the way a worry stone wears down smooth. She set it between the salt shaker and the ketchup bottle. Doc did not touch the letter. He read. Troy leaned. The sentence sat in the middle of the page, like clean poison. Failure to maintain performance standards, the spacing tight, the tone sterile, the kind of language built to close doors and call that closure process. Doc angled his phone, framed the page and the date in one image, and took the picture with the sound off. He took another, the camera focusing on the line with a hiss only his own bones could hear. He set the phone on the table where Sarah could see the picture and the small clock number in the corner. This holds our place until we stamp it. Then we will staple a receipt and a signed note with time, place, and witnesses. Sarah nodded and pulled the blanket around her shoulders without thinking. The blanket carried the smell of motor oil and sun, the kind of warmth you believe because someone earned it by hand. Tiny had not spoken. He watched the window glass, and the reflections like a man reading 2 different books at once. He tapped a rhythm on his thigh, a quiet code that meant he was thinking ahead. Troy read the code the way he had read trouble all his life. Sarah, Troy said, hand on the table so she would not have to look up to know where his voice came from. One more question. If it is too much, say so, and we pause. Ask. She said, did anyone from the landlord call in the days after the letter? Sarah frowned at the memory. A woman left a message. She said if we needed help moving, she knew a service. She said they worked fast. The numbers started the same way as Mason Logistics. I remember because the beginning looked familiar. Doc circled his earlier underline. Rev breathed out in a quiet line, and the glass of water on the table trembled once. Troy's phone buzzed against his hip. He let it. There would be a time for screens. This booth deserved to be the kind of place where words fixed what screens broke. He allowed the room a moment to hold them all. The hiss of bacon turned sweeter, then faded as the burner came down. The hum of the ceiling fan steadied like a held note. Sarah's hands loosened. Olivia lifted her head a fraction and took another bite, as if her body had finally accepted that no one would snatch the plate away. "Olivia," Troy said gently, "two things, if you can." She kept her cheek on Buddy but angled her eyes toward him. "Okay, when you braided the leash, did you do it in the apartment or in the car?" "In the car," she said. "At night, I used my old jump rope because the clothesline cut my fingers. And when you came out here this morning, did you leave your mother a note?" Olivia looked at the frayed fibers. "On the dashboard," she said. "I wrote that I went to get help. I wrote that I was sorry." Rev nodded once, a small acknowledgement that he had seen the note. He would bring it if they needed to place it with the other pieces. Doc slid the letter back towards Sarah, and she left it on the table, a thin slab of proof that had been meant to end a life and would instead begin a record. Troy shaped the next minutes with the care he kept for work that mattered. "Here is what happens now," he said, voice tempered to persuasion that felt like certainty. "Buddy eats until hunger is only a memory of noise. You and Olivia drink water and let it sit slow. Rev will take you to my shop. There is a small apartment above the garage. It is warm. It is yours for as long as you need." Sarah opened her mouth. Troy raised a palm. "No depth," he said. "No strings. Help is the point." She closed her mouth and nodded, the nod of someone who had found a floor under her again. He turned to Doc. "After they are settled, we build the paper. Copies of the termination letter, the rent notice, any saved voicemail. We pull hospital scheduling and match those dates against the notices. We start the chain with signatures and time written in ink." Doc tapped his pen twice. "I will pull public parcels on Morrison. I will cross with vendor records on Mason. If Rev's portable printer still works, we print receipt stamps with place and minute, so no one argues about when a copy entered our hands. Portable is in my saddlebag," Rev said. "Ink is low. I have a spare," Tiny said, eyes still on the glass. Those small facts settled like bolts tightened to spec. "Troy, let them anchor something larger, and then set the stake that bound it all." He looked at Olivia. "Nobody is taking your dog," he said. "If anyone asks for him, they talk to me. If anyone tries to make you choose again, they meet all of us." Olivia's fingers tightened on the leash. "Even if they are in charge," she said. "Especially then," Troy replied. Sarah looked at him, the way people look at bridges they are not sure will hold. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You do not know us." Troy did not reach for explanation bigger than the truth he trusted. "Because someone made you decide what love you could afford," he said. "That is not business. That is cruelty. We are good at ending patterns that hurt people who do not hit back." Rosie slid a small paper cup with a lid toward Olivia, as if erasing the need to ask might erase the shame of needing. "Hot chocolate," she murmured. "Careful. It is brave." Olivia cupped it with both hands and breathed in the sweetness before she sipped. Buddy finished the food and tapped the bowl once with his paw, not asking for more, so much as acknowledging that there was more to give. Outside, the wind lifted a napkin and laid it down again. The light stepped a shade brighter along the chrome of the parked bikes. The booth had become a first line, a quiet fort, a table where fear broke on the ordinary. Troy straightened and checked the exits and the street and the faces of his men. He looked down at the letter again. A sentence built to close a door was becoming a doorframe for a case. They would stack more pieces against it. They would tie a name to a date, a notice to a chart, a landlord to a brother by marriage, a profit line to a key at cruelty. He heard a clean truth seat itself in the back of his mind with a click he trusted. They did not know it yet, but the landlord and the boss were bound by family, and they had designed this harm together. He kept that truth where only the audience could hear it for now. He let himself stay the man who felt patterns before he named them. He put his palm flat on the table and met Sarah's eyes. "Finish eating," he said. "Then we go." The convoy from Rosie's diner to the shop moved slow through the thin Sunday traffic, the kind of quiet pace that says there is no hurry, because what they carried mattered more than the clock. Troy rode behind the Civic, keeping it in the center of his mirrors. The sight of that small car between their bikes steadied something inside him. The hum of the engines wrapped around it like a promise. Buddy's head appeared now and then at the rear glass, fogging the pain with each slow breath. Stone's Auto Repair stood at the edge of the industrial block, a wide red door scarred from years of work and weather. Above it, a square apartment window burned yellow against the gray. The smell of oil, metal, and soap met them as the bikes rolled in. It was not fancy, but it was clean, the kind of place built by men who believed that order was another word for respect. Troy cut his engine and stepped down, his boots echoing against the concrete. Rev opened the Civic's back door, helped Sarah out, and carried the plastic file box that held everything she owned on paper. Olivia climbed out next, clutching Buddy's leash. The dog's tail wagged once and stopped. He stood waiting, tired but alert, nose searching the air for permission. Troy crouched beside him and filled a metal bowl from a hose by the wall. "Drink, boy." Slow, Buddy lapped the water with a soft, grateful rhythm. Olivia knelt beside him, brushing her fingers through his fur, whispering nothing words that only dogs understand. "Upstairs," Troy said. "There's heat, a couch, and a bed." Sarah hesitated until Rev gestured toward the staircase. The steps creaked under her weight but held firm. Troy followed, carrying the file box. The apartment opened in the warm smell of detergent and wood polish. 2 small rooms, a square of kitchen, a window above the shop door. It was simple, bright, alive. Sarah stopped just inside and covered her mouth. "You can stay here," Troy said. "No rent, no debt, just breathe." Doc entered a moment later with his canvas bag, setting it on the kitchen table. Tiny followed, his size filling the doorway, a laptop under one arm. They moved without needing words, the rhythm of people who had done hard things together. "Start with the paper," Troy said. Doc pulled folders, labels, and a compact printer from his bag. He arranged them with care. "We build a record. Each document gets a photo with a visible clock, a receipt tag with minute and location, and a witness signature. We close every gap so nothing can vanish." Sarah blinked. "I don't know if I can remember everything." "You don't have to," Doc said. "The paper remembers for you." She opened the file box, lifting a worn envelope first. The letter that had ended her husband's job. Doc turned on his phone camera, the clock glowing in the corner. He photographed the page, printed a label, and wrote the date and place. "Witnessed by Rev," he said. Rev signed his name steady as a ruler. Sarah followed, her signature small but firm. "Next," Doc said. "The voicemail." Sarah answered. "The woman from the moving service." Rev found her phone and plugged it into a wall outlet. The screen flickered awake. Battery weak but alive. Sarah pressed play. A smooth female voice offered fast relocation and storage, same-day service. No charge up front. The tone was kind, but the number on the screen carried the same first three digits as Mason Logistics. Doc recorded the playback on his phone so the timestamp appeared in the corner. He printed another label, linked by area code. He murmured, "Too clean to be coincidence." Tiny had already opened his laptop on the couch. His fingers moved across the keys with surprising grace for hands that could bend metal. "Property database," he said. "County registry lists the building on Maple Street. Owner of record, Frank Morrison. Permit filed for cosmetic improvements. No plumbing. No structure. Just paint and locks." "Evictions?" Troy asked. Tiny clicked. The screen filled with case numbers. 3, this quarter. Apartment 3, C, 2, A, and basement studio, 3C. Sarah said quietly, "That's us." Doc leaned closer. 2A, older couple. "Right." Sarah nodded. "He walks with a limp. She wears blue slippers with flowers." Tiny scrolled. "Filed the same week as yours. Basement studio listed as nuisance." He captured screenshots with the system clock in the frame and saved them to a folder marked Miller pattern. "Hospital records next," Doc said. "Dates of Michael's stays." Sarah fished through folded papers. "Here. Admission dates. March 10th, March 23rd. Tiny checked the eviction logs again. Rent increase. Dated March 12th. Eviction notice, posted March 25th. Right between, Doc said. Perfectly timed to exploit. He printed the page, underlined the overlap, and added a label. "Now connect them," Troy said. Tiny opened another tab and searched Mason Logistics. The business filing appeared after a few keystrokes. "Manager, Gerald Pritchard." He read aloud. "Mailing address. Care of Morrison Holdings." He exhaled. "Slow and certain. They share a roof." Doc printed the screen. He did not need to circle anything. The truth was bold enough. He clipped it to the other pages and sealed the stack with a binder clip that clicked like a handcuff closing. "Lavier," Troy said. "Call now or after they rest?" Doc asked. Troy glanced toward the couch. Olivia had curled up beside Buddy, her hand resting on his back. Sarah sat nearby, watching her child breathe, tears drying on her face. "Call now," Troy said quietly, "but keep it short. We file when they wake." Rev stepped into the hallway and dialed. He handed the phone to Troy when the line clicked. "We need an injunction and a housing complaint," Troy said. "Termination letter. Rent hike notice. Voicemail, linking both companies. 3 active eviction cases. 1 hospital overlap. Yes, I'll bring a labeled packet today. No, this isn't for sympathy. It's for proof." He paused, listening. "Yes, we'll wait. Thank you." When he hung up, the room felt smaller, but steadier. He looked at Sarah. "You'll come with us to sign. We'll keep copies. You won't stand in that office alone." Sarah nodded once. A single, quiet motion of trust. The apartment settled into a soft hum. The printer whirred again, spitting out labels that smelled faintly of warm plastic. Tiny folded one between his fingers, pressed it to the chain of custody sheet, and smoothed it with his thumb. "We're building weight," he said. "Paperweight." Rosie appeared in the doorway with a grocery bag, staying just outside the threshold. "I stocked your fridge last winter when the heater broke," she said. "This feels like the same thing." She handed the bag to Troy. "Bread, peanut butter, eggs, and apples. Something to last the night." Troy nodded. "You're part of this now." Rosie's gaze landed on Olivia and the dog. "She's stronger than she looks," she said softly. Then she turned and left. Doc stacked the pages into order. Termination. Rent notice. Voicemail transcript. Property record. Eviction log. Business registration. He tapped the pile square against the table and slipped it into a clear sleeve. All labeled, all witnessed, he said. Ready for filing. Troy studied the pages a long moment. This is the first move, he said. After this, everything stays public. Tiny leaned back on the couch, arms crossed. Then we find 2A, he said. The couple she mentioned, if they're still out there, their testimony doubles the pattern. They'll be somewhere nearby, Rev said. People like that don't go far. They drift until something stops them. Troy nodded. We'll stop them the right way. Olivia stirred on the couch, half awake, whispering Buddy's name. The dog's ears flicked, tail giving one sleepy tap. Sarah rose, tucked the blanket around her daughter, and met Troy's eyes. Thank you, she said. Troy's reply was simple. You're safe now. We'll make sure others are too. Outside, the late afternoon light bent gold through the workshop windows. Dust drifted in quiet motion, catching the glow like ash from a slow fire. The printer clicked one last time, stamping the final label with date and minute. Doc peeled it free and pressed it to the back of the folder. Complete, he said. Troy stood at the window, looking out at the street that divided the old warehouse district from the city beyond. The world kept moving, car passing, horns distant. None of them knew that inside this small apartment, justice had started breathing again. He turned back to the table, to the men who had built something solid from fragments of despair. We have enough for the first move, he said. We do it clean. We do it in daylight, and we make sure every name on those papers is heard. Tiny closed his laptop. Rev locked the file box. Doc packed the printer. Troy looked at Olivia one last time. The child slept soundly now, Buddy's paw resting over her hand like a seal on a promise. He spoke quietly, the words steady as metal on stone. Finish the labels, he said. Then we go. They left the apartment the way people leave a room where rest is finally winning, careful with every footfall, voices lowered out of respect rather than fear. Rev stayed behind to mind the quiet fort they had built, a chair tilted under him, the file box near his boot, the child and the dog breathing in the same slow rhythm. Troy took the satchel with the packet and nodded to Sarah and to Doc. The plan had been set in ordinary words, and now those words became steps on a stair. Morning sharpened outside. The sky held a clean, pale light over the old government block, and the brass rail on the courthouse steps wore the warm shine of many hands. Troy carried the satchel the way a mechanic carries a trusted tool. Doc matched his pace to Sarah, a half step behind and to the side, ready in case the floor shifted under grief and memory. Inside, the lobby smelled of paper and polish and dust that had learned patience. A large clock worked above the hall like a steady witness. Signs along the marble pointed the way without drama. Housing counter, records, clerk of court. Troy touched the satchel once, a small grounding, then looked to the window for housing. A woman sat behind the glass, her posture upright, a block hand moving across a form. When she finished the last line, she looked up and took them in with a glance that did not judge, only measured. She slid a clipboard forward with a narrow smile that did not waste anyone's strength. Complaint form, she said. Attach copies. List dates and notices. If you have medical documentation, note it and provide it when you can. Doc unslung the satchel and opened it on the narrow ledge with the careful neatness he used for torque specs. He did not talk. He let paper speak in order. First, the termination letter, then the rent notice, then the voicemail transcript with time, the printout of the property record, the eviction docket lines, the business registration that linked management and mail. Each page wore its small label with minute and place, initials and witness. The woman's eyes traveled over every corner. She tapped the rent notice with the back of her pen, Market rate adjustment, she read softly, and there was iron in the softness. She turned her gaze to Sarah and lowered her voice for one person rather than three. You are doing the right thing. Sign here. Sign again to authorize us to request documents from the landlord and the employer. Sarah signed with a hand that had steadied since the morning. Doc signed as witness. Troy stood half a shoulder closer to the room without blocking anything. A quiet piece of presence offered rather than imposed. The woman slid the stack into a bin, reached for a stamp, and pressed ink to paper with a sound that always felt like the start of a different weather. Received, she said. Today, she wrote her name under the mark and handed Sarah a copy sheet. You will hear from an investigator. If your landlord or employer contacts you, refer them here. Do not engage. You are on record. Sarah held the sheet as if the ink could be stolen if she eased her grip. Thank you, she said, and the words were not just polite. They were a kind of homecoming. They crossed to the clerk of court. The clerk wore a tie that had seen the end of more than one administration and had learned patience the hard way. Doc slid the packet forward. Injunction filing, he said. The clerk flipped pages, paused at the labels, looked once at Troy, and then back to the pages, and some old line of doubt eased by a notch. You will be assigned a time, the clerk said. The judge will want the sequence clear. This is clear. He stamped the cover and wrote a number with careful strokes, then tore a receipt and pushed it through the slot. Doc dropped it into a sleeve, set a label, and pressed his thumb once along the edge. Chain intact, he murmured. Not for effect, only to confirm what had been done. They stepped onto the stone steps again, and the air felt different. Not warmer, only truer. The weight of what they carried had shifted from arms to process. Sarah looked out across the square with a face that belonged to a woman in a kitchen rather than a case in a file. Now what? She asked. Not timid, simply exact. Now we find the couple from 2A, Troy said. Rev answered when Doc called. The apartment was quiet. The child and the dog still slept, a small piece earned and guarded. Tiny had already left the shop with a printout of units and docket lines. Next stop, he had said, Maple Street. They drove there with Sarah between them, not as cargo, as compass. The building sat under the noon light, with its new lobby paint and its old pipe stink. A fresh deadbolt on the basement door gleamed with a kind of grin. Mailboxes held flyers for a move service that promised speed and kindness. Doc photographed one with the wall clock in frame, a small net thrown over a small fish. A man in a cap leaned in the doorway, a spectator to patterns. Lived here long? Troy asked. Long enough, the man said. You the new super or the old trouble? Troy let the jab slip by. We are looking for the couple from 2A, he said. We are trying to help. The man weighed them, saw Sarah, saw the satchel, and reached for a quiet test. Blue flowers on her slippers, he said. He jerked his chin toward the street. Church bus picked them up last week. Over by the river now. Her sister likes mornings at the laundromat near the bridge. Thank you, Troy said. He did not offer bill. The man had given truth without charging for it, and respect was the right currency. They found the laundromat with the glass front and the hum that never stops. The heat was damp and clean. A line of dryers spun time into circles. Tiny sat near the door, a bag of quarters on his knee like ballast, a nod for greeting and a glance toward the back. They were there, folding slow, careful as prayer. The woman wore the blue slippers with flower. The man eased weight from leg to leg and hid the wince, because habit teaches that no one pays for your pain. Sarah went first. She did not lead with paper. She led with her own name. I am Sarah, she said. We lived in 3C. You waved to my daughter with the pink bike. Recognition softened the woman's face, and something close to relief replaced caution. She named her husband with a touch to his arm. He nodded once. Polite and wary. "We got a notice," the woman said. "Then a bus. Very kind, very fast." A smile like a favor. And then the door was not ours. Doc held the clear sleeve up so the rent notice could be seen in the air rather than handled. "Did yours say this?" he asked. "Market rate adjustment." The woman pressed her lips thin and nodded. The man watched Troy the way a driver watches a road in winter. Troy kept his voice level. "We have a record that ties your notice to the same week as a hospital admission downstairs. 3 eviction cases from the same building in the same quarter. We are filing. You will be named only if you want to be. You will be protected either way." The man took a long breath and let it out slow. "We will tell what they did," he said, "but not on a screen, in a room with a door, and a person who writes it down right." Doc nodded once. A craftsman hearing the measure he prefers, he took names and a phone number written on the back of a laundromat receipt. He photographed the receipt with the wall clock in the frame, so that time could not argue later. A small office lent him a tiny printer that whirred like a patient insect. He set a label in the corner and smoothed it down with his thumb. "Chain intact," he said. And this time the words felt like a shield, and not just a method. Tiny stood up, the chair groaning without complaint. He held out the bag of quarters. "For your next round," he said in a tone that did not allow pride to be wounded. The woman tried to refuse. He shook his head. Once, gentle, the dryer hummed in agreement. They left the couple with a plan that did not trade safety for speed. Meet at a counter with a clerk and a stamp. No cameras, no shouting. A room, a record, a signature that forces other signatures to appear. Back on the sidewalk, the river pressed under the bridge with the sound of work well done. Doc added the new receipt copy behind the rent notice in the satchel and wrote one line on the chain sheet with neat certainty. Sarah stood very still, testing the new balance of the day. Troy looked at Tiny. "One more piece," he said. "We will not shove. We will hold a door." They reached the shop by mid-afternoon light that turned the dust in the air into small gold. Rev opened the door before they knocked. The apartment was still warm and steady. The child had shifted and tucked her hand under the dog's paw, and the dog held it like a seal on a promise. Doc set the satchel on the table and tucked the new page into place. Tiny backed up the images to a small drive on a simple chain. Troy washed his hands and dried them on the old towel with the faded logo. He looked at Sarah. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. A yes with better weight to it. "We go back to the counter in daylight," he said. "We hand them the new page. We ask for a copy with a fresh stamp. We keep moving until the paper weighs more than any excuse." "And after?" Tiny asked. "After," Troy said, "we make sure the men who set this pattern hear their names where truth does not echo and vanish. We will not raise our voices until the doors are open and the cameras are pointed the right way. When that happens, the next step will already be labeled." Rev checked the street. The city went on with its public errands. Somewhere, a calendar now held a time for a judge to hear a simple, clear sequence. Somewhere else, 2 men had no idea. A plain chain of paper had already begun to tighten around the story they told themselves. Troy lifted the satchel and felt purpose settle in his shoulders like a well-fitted jacket. He looked once more at the sleeping child and the dog, then turned to the door. "Let us file the next piece," he said. "Then we go find the rest." They moved in daylight because daylight made rooms answerable. Troy shouldered the satchel and took the stairs with the steady weight of a man who knows the difference between speed and haste. Doc locked the apartment door with a soft click that sounded like respect. Rev paused 1 second longer in the hallway, listening for the paired rhythm of a child and a dog at rest. The shop smelled of warm metal, machine soap, and the bread Rosie had left behind. An ordinary chorus tuning the day. The second filing did not try to be dramatic. It did not need to be. The city felt like the same city, only sharper along its edges. As if sidewalks and stone railings had decided to pay attention, they parked by the old building with the brass that had been polished by decades of working hands. Sarah walked between Troy and Doc with her fingers tucked under the blanket, not hiding, only keeping the warmth she had earned. Inside, the lobby carried paper and polish on its breath. A large clock kept honest time without apology. Troy scanned the signs the way a mechanic reads a dashboard. Not for show, for signals. Housing counter. Records. Clerk of court. They moved toward housing with steps that matched the room. The same woman lifted her head at the window. She did not perform recognition. She simply reached for a clean pad and set her pen where any answer could begin. Doc unslung the satchel and laid the new page flat. The laundromat receipt beneath clear plastic, the small printed label resting in the corner like a sworn whisper. He did not narrate. He let ink and texture do the work. The woman leaned in, read the name scrawled in ballpoint, glanced at the photo of the receipt with the wall clock caught in the frame, and nodded once. A motion that meant the chair at the table had been pulled out for the next person. "We will add this to your file," she said. "It broadens the pattern." She pressed rubber to ink, and ink to paper. "Received," she said. She wrote the minute and her name. She slid a copy to Sarah, and did not say good luck. She said, "Keep going." At the clerk of court, the same tie and the same patience met them. Doc presented the supplemental page with the chain sheet behind it like a spine. The clerk checked labels, signatures, and order as if checking torque in a cross pattern. He stamped with a steady hand and wrote a number with a neat discipline that pleased even his own standards. "The judge will have this with the packet," he said. His tone had shifted a fraction toward respect, not for the men, but for the work. Outside on the steps, noon tilted the light into gold. Sarah loosened her grip on the copy by a hair. Doc slid the receipt into a sleeve and pressed a fresh label flat with his thumb. "Chain intact," he said, not as a flourish, only as a truth set in place. "Now we make heat," Troy said. Back at the shop, the apartment hummed with the soft sound of safety. Olivia slept on her side with her hand tucked under Buddy's paw, the leash draped in a loose scarf across both of them. Rev sat in the chair by the door with one boot hooked under the file box, the way a man rests his foot on a brake at a red light. "Quiet," he said. Troy checked the street and the clock and the angle of the sun across the bay door. Then he scrolled to the number that lived in his phone because some people had earned the privilege of being called when a story needed gravity. "Jake," he said when the line opened, "I have a clean story, not a performance. Paper first. Witnesses in daylight. A hearing this afternoon. No faces without counsel. Hands and documents only. If you come, you stand where I tell you, and you help hold a door for anyone hurt by this pattern. Can you do that?" Jake Martinez did what Troy trusted him to do. He let the silence breathe. Then he said yes. He said he would bring a small crew and a mic that would not hiss, and he asked what to wear, which was his old way of asking how far inside the room he would be allowed to stand. "Wear your work face," Troy said. "We are not auditioning. We are making room." They met on the shop floor, not in the apartment. Jake parked a plain car and rolled one shoulder against the cold. He shook hands without anchor smiles and scanned the space the way a good reporter reads a church before a service. He nodded to Doc and to Rev and to Tiny, who watched him the way a beam watches a load it plans to carry. When a soft scuff sounded from the ceiling, Jake lowered his voice as if the building itself had spoken. "Tell me where to stand." Jake said, "By the workbench Troy answered. Documents in frame, no faces, no names until the order is stamped. We show what can be verified. We hold back what would put anyone at risk. Jake's producer set a small tripod and a camera with honest glass. The red tally light stayed dark. Jake tapped the mic with a fingernail, listened for the rise on the meter, and nodded once. Ready, he said. Troy laid the packet on the wood. He lifted each page the way a person lifts a necessary tool. Termination letter. Rent notice with the market language. Voicemail transcript from a move service with the employer's area code, property record naming a holding company with a listed agent. Eviction docket entries for 3 units in the same quarter. Business registration that tied the employer's management to the landlord's mail. He placed them in order, not as a show, but as a path. Doc handled the details that keep truth straight. He slid each page into the frame and held the chain sheet beside it, so any viewer with a pause button could test the method. Witness initials, minute and place, clear sleeve without smudge. Rev watched the door and the street. Tiny watched the eyes behind the lens. He saw the moment when heat and method decided to share the same room. Jake asked the questions that matter. Did you witness these signatures? Yes. Do you hold the original audio? Yes. Will you name the companies today? We will name them when the stamped order sits on the table and counsel is present. He did not push past the boundary. He said his words where they would hold. I will put out a call, Jake said, not a blast, an invitation. If you lived in this building, if you worked for this employer, if your rent rose or your job ended the week, sickness touched your family, bring your paper to a counter that will not lose it. Bring your name to a table that will not trade it. Diner or church? Diner, Troy said. Rosie's. We set a window after the hearing. People bring copies. They keep originals. We make a list. We sit folks in booths. We let coffee and time do slow work. We call the lawyer when a page needs a stamp. Jake almost smiled. This is not how most shows are made, he said. This is how repair is done. Troy answered. They filmed only what the day required. The lens captured hands and edges and labels, and the calm repetition of chain and witness and place. Jake recorded a short stand-up at the bench. He did not raise his voice. He flattened it to the register that tells a person where to look and why. He named the diner and the window in a lower third that would sit plain at the bottom of a screen. People do not need to be shouted at, he said when he set the mic down. They need a door that will not slam. When the crew left, the shop exhaled. The space felt larger, as if the building had tried on the shape of a public square and found it fit. Troy looked up at the ceiling where the quiet above drew lines on a map that ended at Mercy. Doc slid the packet into the satchel and checked the strap. Tiny lifted the drive from the laptop and hung it back under his shirt. A small metal oath. Rev scanned the street again and read nothing dangerous there. The phone rang. Doc answered and listened with the stillness that makes people trust him. He covered the mouthpiece and passed the phone to Troy. Housing investigator, he said. The voice was crisp without edge. We have your complaint and the supplemental page. We will conduct a site visit this afternoon. If any witnesses want interviews, we will arrange a separate room. Do not engage with the landlord. Report any contact. Thank you for presenting your file in order. It speeds our work. Troy thanked the voice for specifics and set the phone down. That is our first small payoff, he said. Not a cheer. Movement. Sarah stood in the apartment doorway, sleep and steadiness sharing her face. A mug warmed her hands. Steam traced a small bright line across her cheek. She looked at Troy as a person looks when a question can finally be asked without debt attached. Will this help the others? She said. Yes. Troy answered, not like a miracle, like work. Rosie arrived with brown paper bags that smelled of onions and comfort and did not need plates. She did not ask for a report. She squeezed Troy's forearm once and left, the shop bell giving a clear note that sounded like the word ready. When the hour came, they climbed the brass again. The hearing room was small and exact. The judge wore the face of a person who understands that law is a tool and that a tool is only as good as the hand that sets it straight. Doc spoke the sequence while Troy stood at Sarah's shoulder and matched his breath to the pace of the pen across the order. Paper made the argument. The judge did not deliver sympathy. The judge delivered the thing that narrows fields where harm can hide. A stamped order set down with authority that did not need a speech. Outside, the light felt like a road that had been plowed by effort rather than melted by luck. On a screen somewhere, Jake's piece rolled with the sound turned to steady. The call for the window at the diner moved through the city like a bell rung for workers. Not everyone heard it. Enough did. They returned to the shop to reset the table and breathe. Rev traded posts with Tiny so a man could rest and a man could watch. The sun slid toward the west and turned the bay door to a sheet of pale fire. Paper rustled like leaves in a tree that had decided to keep standing. The dog thumped his tail once without waking. The child slept through it, learning safety by osmosis. Troy stood at the bench with the satchel open and looked at what they had built. Every page wore its quiet label. Every label wore a minute and a place, and a pair of initials that meant a hand and a witness had met. Heat had been lit, not like a flare, like a furnace. It would not scorch the wrong things. It would make the right room warm enough to step inside without shivering. He turned to Sarah and to Doc and to Rev and to Tiny. "We hold the window," he said. "We count names, we copy pages, we keep the chain, we let the story grow stiff enough to stand in public without bending. When the men who set this pattern step forward to deny what the paper says, we will not argue. We will add their words to the stack and carry the stack to the next counter." He looked up once more, to the ceiling, to the map of quiet above. Then he closed the satchel, checked the lock, and set it by the door. When the bell at the diner rang later, it would not be for breakfast. It would be for heat that holds. Rosie wedged the diner door open and cracked 2 windows to let the river air move through the room. The smell of coffee drifted under the neon hum and settled over red vinyl like a soft coat. She laid out extra mugs, plain, white, and heavy at the lip, and wiped the counter in one clean circle. The bell above the door gave a small test chime, and then rested, ready. Troy came first with Doc and Tiny and Sarah. He carried the satchel like a carpenter carries a box of squares and levels, not a trophy and not a threat. A measure. Doc set his compact printer by the corner pie case and stacked clear sleeves and labels in a neat row. Tiny slipped onto a stool and opened a spiral notebook, a small drive on a plain chain tucked under his shirt. Rosie nodded once. She did not make a speech. She placed plates at 3 booths, as if laying out tools on a bench. "We work from here," Troy said, voice low. "Counter stays for meals. First booth for paper. Second booth for overflow. Third booth for quiet." Rosie tapped the laminated edge with a knuckle. "Corner light is booth 3, she said. "Good for breathing." Jake walked in with his producer and a shoebox case. He wore his work face, the one that lets other people keep their. He did not flip the camera light. He shook hands, looked once around the room, and took the spot Troy pointed to, the narrow space between the pie case and the bus cart, where he would not steal attention from anyone who did not want to give it. The first person came alone, a woman with a canvas tote and the look of someone who braces for news before it speaks. She stood just past the threshold and glanced at Rosie, at Troy, then down at her shoes. Rosie moved first. "Coffee," she said, Sit where you like. The woman chose the edge of the first booth. As if testing a cold river with one foot, Doc slid a clipboard with a narrow sheet and set a pen on top. Name, unit, date you received notice. He said, voice steady and exact. You keep your originals. We photograph with the diner clock in frame, or make a copy. If you want counsel before you speak on record, we set that up. If you only add paper and leave, we still count your story in the pattern. The woman wrote. Her breath left her in a quiet surprise that did not break. From the tote, she drew a rent notice, folded along tired creases, an employer letter with polished cruelty, a pediatric appointment card she had missed. Doc waited until she placed each page down. Then, he did what the week had taught his hands to do. He photographed the paper with the pass window clock in frame, slid each sheet into a sleeve, printed a label with minute and place and initials, and asked one question only when the paper required it. Was this the first notice, or did you receive a warning? First, she said. Tiny wrote one line in his notebook without looking at her, giving privacy room to sit. The bell chimed again, then again. People arrived in singles and pairs, never in a rush, just steady, as if the town had agreed to breathe together. A man in a work jacket set a layoff letter on the table and apologized to the paper before he let it go. A grandmother handed over a rent hike notice she had kept in a plastic sleeve because rain came through a roof seam and she had not wanted the ink to blur. A young couple brought only a phone, a thread of messages that alternated polite and merciless. Doc recorded the screen with the clock in frame, labeled, and let the chain sheet grow line by line. Jake's lens watched hands and edges. It watched sleeves pass, mugs settle, and the small moment when a person decided a copy could be made. It did not search faces for grief. It watched the paper for law. Rosie kept coffee moving. She set plates without asking first, and without asking later what could be afforded. When a hand shook, she set down water. When the shaking slowed, she refilled a mug. She cleaned with a cloth that moved in gentle rings around stacked evidence, as if to say the world could be made neat, even while hard truths were on the table. Sarah took the third booth, when she was not standing beside someone at the first or second. People looked at her and saw themselves, or a possible after. Some spoke, some did not. She held each gaze just long enough for the person to decide what they needed. She did not tell her own story. She was the proof that paper had not erased a person. Tiny built the ledger while cups moved and labels cooled. He wrote names and unit numbers and dates, each linked to the sleeve number. Doc murmured as he pressed a label with his thumb. Every few pages, Tiny lifted his head, measured the quiet inside his chest, and returned to the book. He would not say a sum until the work itself made it speak. Midway through the window, a man in a faded cap stepped in and stopped just past the bell. He carried nothing, which looked like everything. Rosie met him with a plate and a soft order to sit. He ate 2 bites like a man remembering how. Then he rose, walked to the first booth, placed a badge on the laminate, and said they made it stop working. The letter said, "Failure to maintain." He looked at Troy the way a driver watches ice. Troy nodded once, a knot tied against weather. Doc photographed the badge beside a last printed schedule with the clock overhead, then put the badge back in the man's hand. The way you return a name. The bell kept time. Afternoon light traveled in slow squares across the floor and lit the corner of a sleeve until it looked like a pane. The red dot on the camera stayed dark until Jake lifted a finger. Then it blinked on, breathed for a minute, and went dark again. His questions were pared down to clean bone. Is that signature yours? Is this language the same? Does this number match the exchange that called you? Sometimes the answer was yes. Sometimes it was "I think so," and Doc set numbers side by side, so the certainty belonged to the person who had to live with it. A woman with a baby asleep against her chest brought a notice written to be misunderstood. Rosie led her to the corner light. Sarah read the words aloud. "Only the parts asked for." The woman nodded, passed the paper to Doc, watched the photograph, the label, the sleeve, and the small breath that followed a plank laid into a bridge. By late afternoon, the satchel had given birth to a new stack with a spine. Doc numbered each sleeve and ticked off each number on the chain sheet. He flexed his fingers and reached for the next page. Tiny closed his notebook for the first time and set his hand on the cover. He lifted his eyes to Troy. "Say it," Troy said. Tiny swallowed once and made room for a small word. 47, he said. He did not raise his voice. "Apartments and jobs and notices and calls." 47. Rosie leaned her hips to the counter and let her weight help the room hold. Sarah closed her fingers around the mug and breathed out. Jake did not lunge the lens. He repeated the number back, soft, to seat it where it belonged. 47. Tiny said again, now like a vow. "The pattern holds. We are not done," Troy said. "We put this down in the right room." He looked to Jake. "You show hands and paper and say the number. You say there will be more. You do not say names. You do not point at faces. You tell people where to bring the next page." "I can do that," Jake said. Sarah was ready to sign the witness lines for the second set to court. Her hand did not shake. Rosie steadied the edge of the table with 2 fingers. A mother lending balance without being asked. Doc set a small line at the counter. "Estamped labels." Tiny read the ledger. Sarah signed where witness belonged. The producer caught a slow pass across the label corners. The initials, the minute marks, the evidence of care. Jake stood before the pie case and spoke with the register of a neighbor who knows which wall in your house carries sound. He said the number and the process. He said the diner name and the hour the window would open again. He did not sell anything. He invited. As the light thinned, a last man came in and sat at the counter in clothes that fit wrong on a body new to rest. He slid a thin envelope to booth 1. The letter held the same sentence as the others, the same dates in a different shape. The signature at the bottom wore a name they already knew from a business filing. Doc photographed the page with the pass cloth, pressed on a label, slid the sleeve into the stack, and closed a binder clip. The metal made a small cough that had begun to sound like a hinge on the right door. Troy looked at the people still seated, the empty plates, the full mugs, the faces that had come to be counted without being herded. He felt the moment when a private fight became a public record. He did not raise his voice. He spoke to Rosie, to Doc, to Tiny, to Sarah, and to the air that would carry the words to whoever needed them. "We have enough to strike the match in the right place," he said. "Tonight we secure copies and deliver a summary to the housing investigator and the clerk. In the morning we open this window again. When calls come from the men who set this pattern, we do not answer. We log the ring. We write the time. We let the paper keep talking." Rosie turned the open sign to closed for 1 hour, so the room could reset without losing its warmth. Jake packed his camera and promised a piece with hands and pages and the low bell of his voice asking for more truth to walk through a diner door. Sarah stacked mugs and carried them to the bus cart, like a person cleaning her own kitchen. Tiny lifted the small drive on its chain, pressed his thumb to the metal, and tucked it back. 47, he said again, "Not for count, for oath." Doc zipped the satchel and tugged the strap once, a habit learned on roads where you do not want anything to spill. Troy picked it up and felt the weight he wanted. Noteboarden, evidence. He looked at the door, at the ready bell, at the window where the river light went from silver to charcoal. He thought of a dog's paw laid over a child's hand, and a note in a car that said, I went to get help. He turned to the room, to the paper that now held so many names, where names cannot be lost. We keep the chain, he said. We widen the circle. We do not rush. We do not stop. The bell chimed as they stepped into the cooling evening. It sounded like a promise spoken out loud at last. They set the morning like a stage without a script, only rules. Troy stood on the shop floor at first light and read the day the way a mechanic reads weather in the breath of a bay door. River air slipped along the concrete. The city held that thin quiet before trucks took their routes. Upstairs, a child turned once and settled. The dog made a small sound that was not warning and not dream. It was enough. Troy called the chapter with the tone he saved for storm. Not a blast, a bell. Meet at the lot behind the freight silos. Leather on, patches, buttoned, no open carry, no bait, no shove, cameras present, not for theater, for receipts. Every man rides with a printed sheet in the cut pocket. Each sheet lists the count they had taken at the diner and the places they filed. We speak with our order. We let paper talk. Tiny stacked 2 milk crates with spare ink, blank labels, sleeves, and forms. Doc slid the main packet into the satchel and added a slim folder marked public. Copies meant to be handled by hands that might never touch the originals. Rev hauled a coil of rope and cones striped with tape, a way to mark a line on a sidewalk without pretending to own it. Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway wrapped in the same blanket from that first morning, watching the moment when a plan stops being talk and becomes weight. You do not have to go. Troy said, I am not going to the front. She answered, I will sit with Rosie, but I will not hide. Troy nodded once and accepted the boundary as a promise kept both ways. They rolled out as the light lifted a degree, bikes lined in a clean row. Chrome, holding dawn like water. Men swung legs over saddles and tightened jawlines into quiet. Reaper, they said as Troy walked the line. He returned each nod with a detail. Mirror can't. Latches tucked. Patch sewn tight. Discipline in daylight. The kind that calms a crowd before a crowd knows it needs calming. His briefing was a carburetor tune spoken plain. We stand where the law says we can stand. We do not block doors. We do not block the ramp. If police arrive, you point them to me and to Doc. You speak only to repeat the words sidewalk and public and order on file. If anyone touches you, you step back. If anyone yells in your face, you do not answer. Keep your hands open. This is for the 47. They moved as one from the lot. Engines at an even note. A small procession dressed for work, not war. Jake's car followed a length back. He had the address for Morrison's office and the time pinned in his head. He checked his work face in the mirror once, then latched the case on the camera. There was nothing left to rehearse. The office sat in a low plaza off a feeder road. A strip of glass and brushed metal trying to feel richer than its rent roll. The sidewalk was wide and clean. A planter held ornamental grass too neat to cut skin. A reader on the door beeped in 2 tones for entry and denial. A laminated sign inside the glass said appointments required. A sentence that liked to hide behind professionalism. They parked along the curb where the city paint promised public. Rev set cones a half step off the bike line and clipped rope between stanchions, a lane that said we made room. Doc unfolded a small table beside the planter, not blocking anything, and laid the public packet under a binder clip. He propped a foam board with 3 blunt lines, 47 families, filings received, witness intake here. He taped a copy of the stamped cover to the corner and smoothed the edge so the seal caught light and answered questions before anyone asked. Troy stood in front of the glass but not in it, a measured foot to the side. Tiny took the far end near the ramp, so no one could call bad faith. A delivery fan slowed. read the scene, and eased past. A woman in scrubs paused with coffee and keys and took a beat to see what this was not. It was not theater. It was not noise. It was presence. Jake set his tripod on the edge of the walk and aimed low. His producer checked ambient sound. The red light breathed once and rested. Jake lifted the mic and kept it at his thigh. He would ask what needed asking when there was something earned to answer. The first staffer arrived in a hatchback and parked 2 slots down. Jacket with the office logo. Expression of a man used to opening rooms that carry other people's bad moods. He took 2 steps toward the door and stopped when he saw the rope line and the faces. He raised his key card like a passport. "You can go in," Troy said. "Sidewalk is public. We will not block. If you want to see the filing covers, they are here." He tapped the board. The staffer's eyes flicked to the stamp and the bold number. He read the line twice, swiped, and went inside, with his head turned just enough to trip. If he had not known the floor plan by heart, the building woke in small noises. A vent coughed, a printer chirped awake, a 2-tone beep sounded for the next key, and then another and another. People glanced through glass, did quick math, and kept moving. Doc handed 1-page summaries to anyone who paused. No names, no faces, dates and phrases. Straight lines that showed clustering you could feel in your teeth. Rent notices bunched. Termination letters bunched. Hospital dates penciled in to make the absence of mercy visible. Near mid-morning, a silver sedan slid into the nearest space and crossed the line like men who do not see lines. Frank Morrison got out with a phone in one hand and a cup with his name on the sleeve in the other. His coat cost a half size too much. He looked at rope, at board, at patch, at the camera, and summoned a smile meant for gnat swatting. "You boys are on private property," he said, planting boys like a spike. "Sidewalk is public." Doc answered, "Tonya's light as paper. Filings are received. Witness intake is here." He did not wave the satchel. He let the board do the talking. Morrison's eyes caught on the stamp for a heartbeat. He schooled his mouth and lifted his card. The reader answered with the deeper tone. He stepped inside, pivoted, and tossed a line meant to sting. "You cannot defame what you cannot prove." Troy did not blink. He raised a stamped cover in an open palm. A priest offering proof of right. "We will not need to," he said to the air more than the man. "We have order. Moments later, a black sedan nosed across a stripe that was not a space. Gerald Pritchard stepped out with a face like a polished doorknob, smooth and handled. No briefcase, no glance at rope. He stared at patches like a language he planned to learn only long enough to insult. "You are interfering with business," Pritchard said, stepping into the breath Troy had left for oxygen. "Sidewalk is public." Doc repeated. "Still paper. Filings received. Witness intake here." Pritchard turned to the camera, as if it were a mirror he meant to punish. "Turn that off," he said. Jake did not move. He pointed at the sidewalk stripe with a finger and touched the mic on his collar. "Public space," he said, a sentence with no weather. Morrison reappeared inside the glass, with a phone pressed to his ear. His mouth formed words that liked to outrun accountability. He flashed 2 fingers at someone off frame, his private sign for speed. The receptionist watched his hand, and then watched the board, and then stared at her own hands until they stilled. 2 patrol cars slid in with lights dark, the way cops enter rooms that are quiet, until they are not. An officer stepped out with a hand near his belt but not on it. He studied the cones, the rope, the distance to the curb, the way the bike sat exactly inside the paint. He let the picture talk. Then he faced Troy, because the center of the scene was not hard to find. "We got a call," the officer said. "Obstruction and intimidation." Sidewalk is public. Troy said, words steady from practice. We are not blocking doors or ramps. These are copy packets. Those are stamped covers. We are taking witness names for a housing investigation. That camera is on hands and paper. If you want to see the order, Doc will show you. If you want names, you will need a subpoena. We are here for 47 families. We will be here until noon. The officer listened to the last word. He glanced through glass at Morrison pacing in his aquarium and at Pritchard's measured rage. He made the decision men make when they find the party keeping the rules. Stay on this side of the rope, he said. Keep the ramp clear. If anyone shoves you, call me. He handed a card. Doc photographed it with the board in frame and the plaza directory clock behind. The habit had become the bones. The officer saw the move and did not mind. He nodded and went inside to speak with Morrison. Pritchard followed close, a shadow trying to be taller than the man who cast it. Jake let the camera breathe. He lifted the mic to his chest and spoke the way he had in the shop. He did not narrate coats or faces. He narrated rules, stamped order, public sidewalk, witness intake. He said the number. He told anyone listening to bring paper to the board, that copies would be made and returned in daylight, that no one would be filmed beyond their hands without consent. A courier arrived with a tube and asked where to sign. Doc pointed to the glass and held up 2 fingers for patience. The courier tapped the corner of the board like a barometer and laughed without malice at the stamp. Inside, Morrison and Pritchard argued in low lines with the officer who had decided to count laws rather than volume. They pointed at rope, at patch, at camera. The officer pointed at the stamp, then at the floor stripe, then at his own card. Processes faced each other, and only one wore a number and a minute. A maintenance man came to the door with a mop bucket and hesitated at the threshold like a sailor measuring a sea. Tiny lifted the rope an inch and made room for the bucket and the man and the small work that keeps buildings honest. The man said thanks and went out and came back and said thanks again without lifting his eyes. The rope settled with a sound that was not a snap and not a sigh. Troy felt the day click 1 notch closer to obvious. Public rooms make private men nervous. Stamps make spin sputter. Presence is heavier than noise when it is carried right. He checked the time by the sun on the glass. He checked the faces of his brothers. Loose yaw, soft knees, eyes forward, hands open. He checked Jake at the edge. Steady, mic low, until an answer had earned a question. He checked Doc with pen in hand, not to scribble, to mark. The door opened again. Morrison stepped out with the officer, a diplomacy smile, lit by a short fuse. He held his hands as if parting a curtain. You have made your point, Morrison said. We will schedule mediated meetings for any tenant inconvenienced by our improvements. Troy's voice stayed low and measurable. 47 families is not inconvenience, he said. We will schedule our meetings at the housing office and at the courthouse. You will attend when the clerk tells you. Council will receive copies. We are here until noon. We will be here tomorrow if needed. Pritchard let a laugh too short to be true. You cannot run a company by consent, he said. We are not here to run your company. Troy answered to the officer as witness. We are here to stop your pattern. Morrison saw Jake raise the mic 2 inches and shut his mouth. He spun and went inside, as if he had ended the talk on purpose. Pritchard memorized patches like a grudge and followed. The plaza breathed. A woman in a winter coat paused, then approached the board. She touched its corner with 1 finger, then pulled a rent notice from a zip bag with a pharmacy sticker on the side. She looked at Troy and then at Doc. He opened the public packet. She slid the copy in and watched him print a small label from a battery unit and press it flat. Tiny wrote a number. Jake did not lift the lens. The woman turned and exhaled like someone stepping off a ferry onto steady ground. Troy's phone buzzed. Doc checked the screen and met his eyes. "Housing investigator," he said. "Speaker." A clear voice came through. "We received your summary and the supplemental count. We are issuing requests to preserve records to Morrison Holdings and Mason Logistics. Do not engage directly. If you are approached, document and call. Our site visit begins within the hour. Your window at the diner remains useful. Keep your intake clean." "Copy," Troy said. He ended the call and let the words land without cheer. He looked at his men, at the door, at the directory clock, at the sun inching up the glass. The match had been struck in the right place. Not a flare, a pilot light in a locked room. "Hold steady," he said. "We break at noon, then Rosie's, then the courthouse if needed. Hands open." Engines ticked as they cooled. A printer chirped behind glass. The camera light breathed and rested. The rope made its quiet line. And Morrison and Pritchard, split by tempered glass and joined by a fear they had not named, watched the sidewalk fill with a kind of order they could not dismiss as noise. They held the line through late morning, air bright and blade thin. The plaza, a quiet stage that refused any script except the one written in ink. Troy watched the minute hand slide and listened to the small chorus of a city at full wake. Engines cooled behind the rope. A vent inside the glass sang a soft mechanical note. Somewhere a printer fed a single sheet forward with a cough and a click. The rope traced its clean curve across the walk, not a barrier, an offered lane. The shift in pressure came as sound before sight. Shoes on tile, a farther door opening and closing with the practiced hush of a building run by forms. The receptionist stood, steadier now, eyes finding the stamped cover on the board before finding faces. A woman in a navy field jacket stepped into view with a thin folder tucked under one arm and a badge that did not need to shine to be believed. She carried process like a carpenter carries a level. The housing investigator had arrived. She pushed through the door and let it settle behind her without looking back for permission. She took in the rope, the cones, the board, the camera pointed at hand, the bikes inside the paint, the men with open palms and quiet shoulders. "Morning," she said, voice measured. "I will review the posted materials, then enter to serve the preservation request. If any employee attempts to seize documents from you, state chain of custody on record and step back. Do not engage." Her gaze found Troy and held a beat like a hinge that knows its weight. "Understood," Troy said. Doc turned the board so the stamped cover faced her square. She read, nodded once, made a neat pencil mark, the eraser long gone to use. She glanced through the glass. Morrison stood in the lobby with a phone to his ear and a smile tightened to the edge of crack. Pritchard hovered at his shoulder with a jaw locked like a drawer. The investigator lifted her folder and stepped inside. The door thumped shut. Through the pane, a brief conversation unfolded in lines and angles. Morrison gestured toward the rope. The investigator tapped the stamp with her pen. Pritchard pointed at the camera. The investigator rested her palm on her badge and spoke without moving much else. The receptionist slid a manila envelope across the counter. The investigator stacked her folder on it, wrote with the economy of someone who makes ink stand upright, then turned, came back out, and held a copy of the preservation request where daylight could find the letterhead, "Served," she said. She pinned one copy to the board with a strip of blue tape, sharp against white, then tucked a second copy into her folder. "Intake may continue. Interference will be noted." The door opened again. Morrison stepped out with Pritchard half a pace behind, both wearing faces freshly painted with concern. Morrison lifted both hands, parting air like a curtain he believed he owned. "We are committed to dialogue. Morrison said. "If former tenants have concerns, we will review each case individually in our office with counsel present." His eyes slid to the investigator's badge, as if trying to purchase it with tone. "Your office has been served a preservation request," she answered. "Any attempt to conduct private meetings without tenant counsel is not advised. Witness intake is occurring on a public sidewalk under observation." She turned the badge until it sat at center, blue tape bright in the corner of his view. Morrison held his smile for one last second, then let it become brittle. Pritchard took a half step toward the camera. "Turn that off," he said, voice low and personal now. Jake did not answer. The red light answered enough. Pritchard looked at the satchel, at the sleeves on the table, at Doc's hands, 2 fingers extended toward the top page, like a pinch that could take the air out of a fact. Doc did not flinch. "Chain of custody," he said, clear enough to carry to the mic and the badge in one line. The investigator's pencil paused over her paper. Pritchard withdrew his hand and tried to twist retreat into authority. The plaza stayed level. Troy felt the day tilt towards something larger than a standoff. He scanned the edge of not yet a crowd, only passers who chose to slow. He noted the sun's angle on the glass. He saw Jake holding the seam between witness and lens. Troy nodded once to Doc. "Show it," he said. "Not loud, not secret, exactly enough." Doc lifted the public packet and laid 3 pages side by side under the clip. The termination letters lined like pressed tin. The sentence "failure to maintain" stamped so many times it hummed like a machine. Rent notices with market language calm as ice. The kind of calm that makes a heart stutter when you hunt for mercy in it. The business registration with the mailing address care of the holding company, the family name matching the letters on the lobby glass behind Morrison's shoulder. Doc did not stop at paper. He cued the voicemail on his phone, the smooth voice offering relief that felt like a shove. He held the speaker low, the plaza directory clock framed behind for any eye that would later pause the frame. The voice slid out into daylight, with that practiced hand on your shoulder tone. Doc let it finish, set his thumb on the time code, and spoke the words the day had earned. Recorded. Witnessed. Labeled for minute and place. He pressed a small sticker onto the transcript, its edge catching sunlight and throwing a modest flare across the pane. The investigator wrote another line. Rosie appeared at the corner with the couple from the 2nd floor between her and the rope, her arm a soft brace at the woman's elbow. They wore the clothes of decent people who had not had a hook for a coat in some time. The man shifted his weight carefully. The woman looked at the board and the tape, and then at Sarah, who stood behind Troy with the blanket folded across her forearms like a shawl you put on to enter a cold church. Their eyes met, and in the space between those 2 women, something steady assembled itself. A bridge without a speech. "We can add our names," the woman said, small voice, unbroken, but not faces. "The child at home does not need a clip to find someday. Hands and paper only," Troy said, stepping aside. Doc received their copies the way a priest receives what is meant to be returned. He photographed each page with the clock and the blue tape edge in frame. He slid each into a sleeve and printed labels with minute and place and initials, then tapped each sleeve into the public stack the way you settle a tooth into a gear and feel the wheel answer. He turned the chain sheet and offered the pen. "Sign as witness to your own papers if you choose. Names stay with your copies unless counsel says otherwise." The man signed first. The woman signed after, hands steady until the curve of the last letter, then steadier. Sarah stepped in and set her name as witness below theirs. The investigator flagged the entry with a small tab. Pritchard could not swallow the quiet. "This is intimidation," he said. "These people are being pressured in public." He gestured at Rope. at patch, at camera, at tape, grasping for a symbol he could bend into a shield. The officer at the plaza edge did not move. He did not need to. The investigator answered, without turning her head, "Intake is voluntary. Interference will be documented." Her pen tapped once against the folder. Metronome for patience. Morrison tried a different angle. One learned from television, a hand on the door jamb, the other flat on his chest. "We can resolve this without a circus," he said. "Our improvements are lawful. Rent aligns with market conditions. Employment decisions are internal matters." He faced the lens for the last line, hoping the words would outrun fact. "We deny any conspiracy." Doc did not debate him. He lifted the business registration so the lens could read the line that tied the employer's management to the landlord's mail. He set it beside a property record with the same family name on the agent line. He placed the stamped cover to their left and the blue-taped preservation notice above. He let proximity work, which is the cleanest kind of argument. The receptionist opened the door and paused on the threshold. She held a small stack of envelopes with both hands, the way you carry plates in a house where noise has consequences. She looked at the investigator, then at Troy, then at the scuffed toe of her own shoe. The investigator nodded. "Step out," she said. The receptionist did set the stack on the table and disappeared back into glass without letting the door kiss her back. Doc did not reach. He wrote on the chain sheet, "Received in daylight from front desk." He asked the investigator to initial. She did. He asked Sarah to initial. She did. Only then did he open the top flap with 2 fingertips and tilt the contents into a shallow pile. Copies of rent notices. Copies of internal memos bearing dates that matched the worst days on the chain. A directive typed in polite font instructing staff to prepare units for immediate turnover upon medical leave. The sentences tried to sound like policy instead of hunger. Pritchard lunged on reflex, palm hovering over the pile as if speed could erase paper. Doc did not grab him. "Chain of custody," he said again, louder. The investigator raised her head and pinned Pritchard in place with the kind of authority that knows bad acts by the muscles that come before them. "Do not touch that," she said. His hand stalled above the page like a moth at a porch light that has turned into a flame. Jake let the red light breathe. He kept his eyes on Troy, waiting for something earned and not theatrical. Troy did not step into the center. He stepped to the side so the camera could see the line of evidence like a road lit by noon. Then he lifted the stamped order and held it next to the preservation notice, the 2 seals nearly touching. He spoke a sentence built to cut straight because it was square. "The paper is talking," he said. "We will not talk over it." Sarah reached for the pen again and set her name on the witness line for the turnover directive. Her signature looked small against the cold sentences and somehow larger than the page. The couple from the second floor initialed where Doc pointed. The officer at the edge of the plaza wrote a line in his own notebook, a habit from mornings spent deciding who had earned the room. Rosie arrived with a tray she had not been asked to carry and handed water to hands that had shaken or had just stopped. She spoke to the investigator, not the men behind the glass. "We will hold a window this afternoon," she said. "If there are more, we will keep a booth." "Useful," the investigator said, and marked the time. Morrison ran out of safe words. He jabbed a finger at the blue tape as if color could be charged with trespass. "You cannot post that on private property," he said. The investigator peeled the tape from the foam, pressed it back half on board and half on public glass, and smoothed it with one thumb. The sound was small and final. "We are done debating lines," she said. Silence found the edges of the plaza and held them steady. A breeze combed the ornamental grass. Far down the feeder road, a truck changed gears. Deep note rolling across concrete. Pritchard's jaw worked, then locked. Morrison stepped back into the lobby and did not turn. Doc stacked the pages in order and bit them with a metal clip that clicked like two small pieces of consequence meeting. He wrote the minute. The investigator wrote the minute. Sarah wrote the minute. The chain sheet looked like a spine that had found all its bones. Jake lifted the mic and spoke in the same steady register he had used in the shop and the diner. He said the seals. He said witness intake and preservation notice. He said the count and the hour it was set down where a clerk could reach it. He did not name men. He named process. Troy let the words go ahead of him. He checked his men. Loose yaw, soft knees, hands open. He checked the rope, straight and clean. He checked Sarah's face, pale from the cost of standing in public and calm with the knowledge they had not been turned aside. He let himself think for one breath of a child asleep above an auto shop with a dog's paw over her hand. Then he set the thought where it belonged, under his feet. We break at noon, he said. Quiet. Enough for his crew. Enough for the mic. Diner window after. Courthouse, if needed. The paper will walk. The red light rested. The folder closed. The officer shifted weight and found no reason to step in. The board kept its blue corner like a small flag on a thing you plan to keep. Inside the glass, two men stood in an office that had never been so visible. On the public stripe outside, the reveal did not need to shout to be heard. Light did the work. Facts cast shadows long enough to follow. They broke the line at noon because discipline keeps its own clock. Engines came alive in a polite ripple and idled down together. Rev gathered the rope. The canvas rasped, whispering like a tide. Doc flattened the board and pressed the blue tape to the foam as if folding a flag. The public packet slid into the satchel. Clip snug. Strap tested with a tug learned on roads where nothing may spill. Jake dropped his mic to his side and glanced once through the glass. Not as a taunt, only to mark a room about to be measured by other hands. Rosie's door received them like a harbor receiving a boat that has done its work. The bell gave a clear note. Coffee rose with the smell of toast and onions and a thin thread of lemon from a clean rag. The corner booth waited like a promise. Sarah settled with the blanket across her lap. Warmth accounted for. Tiny opened the ledger to a fresh page. Rev took the chair with his back to the window. Not from fear, from the habit that keeps rooms safe. Upstairs in the shop apartment, Olivia woke the way a child wakes, when the world has stopped shaking long enough to trust the walls. Buddy's paw still rested across her fingers like an oath. She listened for a truck that did not come. She listened for a knock that did not come. She listened for voices and heard one voice. Her mother's, steady and low below. Stitching minutes together, she smiled into the dog's neck. Buddy sighed and slid closer. The room held. Back at the diner, the window opened because work does not end with one stamp or two. People returned with copies or questions, or simply to stand in air that also held other people. Doc ran intake with the steadiness of a man handling both story and screw. He dated and initialed and set each page beneath the pass window clock so time could be seen doing its quiet part. Tiny wrote lines in the ledger with a hand that had learned patience by lifting heavy things cleanly the first time. Jake set the camera on the counter and did not film. He used a pen with no logo. He said nothing at first because silence earns trust faster than promises. When he asked square, "What hour did the call come? Which number on your phone? Did the letter arrive before or after the notice?" He drew small boxes beside each answer and checked none until the person nodded at their own truth. The phone rang while the bell was still turning plates into a soft music of arrival, Doc looked at the screen and lifted his chin to Troy. "Housing investigator," he said, and tapped speaker. The voice performed sequence, "Not victory. Initial review on site is complete." The voice said, "Records are tagged for preservation. Emergency relief has been granted by the court. Rent increases and employment actions against named parties are barred, while inquiry proceeds. Additional witnesses may report on the second floor of the housing office, room noted in the notice." The voice paused. "Thank you for maintaining chain. Copy," Troy said. He did not smile with triumph. He nodded to Sarah, a small circle closing. A second call followed like a gear finding the next tooth. "Clerk of court," Doc said. He listened, then passed the phone. "Your motion to expand the protective order is set for this afternoon." The clerk said, "Bring stamped covers and preservation notice." The judge asks for a brief witness proffer. Names need not be read into the record at this time. A pen scratched softly in the background, the calendar keeping pace with itself. "We will be there," Troy said. Rosie swapped an empty carafe for a full one and refilled cups that had cooled during calls. She set down plates without ceremony, a form of mercy that wears a kitchen apron. She touched Sarah's shoulder once in passing and kept moving, timing the room, the way a nurse times breaths. When they returned to the plaza for the afternoon stride, the light felt washed, edges sharpened by a thin, unseen rain. A fresh copy of the preservation notice fluttered under new blue tape on the board. The receptionist behind the glass stood easier, calm in the way of someone told by authority that following rules would not cost them breath. The investigator met them with a small smile, granted between professionals when effort becomes effect. Inside, a man in a blazer with a county seal spoke low to Morrison. Pritchard sat on a lobby chair holding his phone with both hands, as if it were a wheel on ice. The officer from morning stood near the aquarium door, notebook open, posture neutral as a scale. "We will take the witness proffer now," the investigator said to Troy, hands only on camera, no faces. Sarah looked from table to door to Troy. He read the question without words. "You choose where to stand," he said. "We follow." They set the proffer in Rosie's booth because that is where the chain had learned to speak. Jake framed the edge of the table. The labels, the stamps, the small handwriting that makes the abstract visible. Doc placed 4 sleeves in a row and spoke each minute and place into the record like a measured prayer. The couple from the second floor signed a line that did not read their names aloud. Sarah signed the witness line after each. Tiny read the ledger number in a voice so soft the mic almost missed it. "Then read again." Clear as a story told to someone you respect. Out at the door, a car slammed with the sound of a mistake. Morrison had chosen badly. He arrived with 2 men in matching suits and matching expressions of superiority, bleeding patience. He entered with his hands opened wide, a smile polished for cameras. "We will resolve this privately," Morrison announced into a room that had not asked for him. He laid down a stack of papers like a conjurer and named them waivers. "Compensation for inconvenience," he said. "Sign now and we can expedite." Rosie did not touch the stack. She wiped a dry circle on laminate and kept the cloth in her hand. Jake did not lift the camera. The investigator rose from a booth where a mug had cooled untouched. She held her badge like a key, not a threat. "Any attempt to solicit waivers while an order stands will be noted as interference," she said. "Counsel for the city is present. Counsel for tenants will be notified. Withdraw those papers, or you will meet violation before your coffee cools." Morrison looked at the suits. They nodded the way people nod when paid to agree. Pritchard came in last and later than sense. He saw the badge and did not yield. He reached for the stack. With the old reflex that treats rules like suggestions, Doc spoke the phrase like a hammer finding a nail. Chain of custody. The officer stepped fully into the room as if a chair had been pulled out for him. He lifted the stack with 2 fingers and set it by the stamped covers. He wrote one line and read it back for his own ear. Papers removed from improper solicitation during active order. He dated and initialed with the practiced hand of a man who writes, as other men set torque. Pritchard aimed his anger at Troy because aiming at the system meant aiming at himself. "You are inciting," he said, a word borrowed from television. "You are ruining livelihoods. We are naming what you did in daylight." Troy said, "The paper is naming it with us." Morrison grabbed for the stack and misjudged the door swing. His cup kissed the glass, and coffee skated down the preservation notice in a brown veil. The blue tape held, the smear dried. A symbol wrote itself without the help of any speech. They walked the short blocks to the courthouse, with the packet humming like a tuned engine in Doc's hands. The hallway smelled of wax, old varnish, and a ghost of paper dust. The clerk opened a door to a room not grand, only true. The judge listened the way a mechanic listens for a knock, not for theater, for placement. Doc spoke the sequence. Stamped cover, preservation notice, ledger count, witness proffer, interference, attempted waivers, officer line. He did not raise his voice. He set each piece where weight would hold. The investigator added 3 sentences that fit like shims. The officer read his note with the tone of a man who no longer doubts his place in a story. The judge asked 2 questions. Who holds the originals? Who stands as custodian for the next term? Doc answered the first. The investigator the second. The judge set down the pen and lifted a sheet that had been waiting for ink since morning. Emergency relief is expanded and extended. The judge said, communications seeking waivers are enjoined. Employment actions under review are stayed. Records shall be produced to the housing office by close of the next business day. The judge glanced over the rim of glasses. Not harsh, simply sure. If you have counsel, tell them to bring a larger briefcase. The order landed with the weight of a thing no breath could budge. Sarah exhaled and realized she had been holding more than air. Tiny closed his eyes and opened them with a look that was not triumph, only rest. Rev set his hand on the satchel long enough to feel the hum quiet. Outside, the glass held 2 silhouettes pacing short, angry circles. The receptionist's shoulders had a new set to them, as if the air inside had grown breathable. Jake spoke before the planter with the same even register he had used all day. He named the order without adjectives, the stay without flourish, the injunction without salesmanship. The pattern has been stopped long enough for law to walk. He said, if you have paper, bring it. If you only have your name, bring that too. The table still has room. They returned to the shop because all roads in a day like this end where you keep your tools upstairs. Olivia had drawn a picture while the hours turned. It showed a dog in a small vest and a girl with a rope-turned ribbon and a line of bikes that were circles and bars and smiles. She held the page at the top of the stairs like a proclamation. Buddy thumped his tail against the doorframe. Approval without need of translation. "Did you fix it?" she asked, a question as simple as a wrench. "We made it hold for now," Troy said. "The rest is work." Sarah reached for his hand and did not let go after the first squeeze. Warmth from paper and coffee and sun rested in her palm. "You did not take the dog," she said. "You took the weight off his neck." "We set the weight where it belongs," he answered. "On paper, on the men who chose it, in rooms that can hold it." Night eased through the bay door. Tiny backed up the drive twice. Doc rechecked labels, the way a man checks lug nuts before a long ride. Rev watched a quiet street that had been loud in the morning. Jake sent his piece and then set his phone face down because the day had earned silence. The investigator sent one last message that said the chain is intact. The officer's card sat under a magnet on the bench, a new number the room could call without fear. Before lights out, Troy opened the satchel and ran a hand along the spine of sleeves. Not to count, to thank. He lifted one at random, saw the minute and the place and the initials that meant a person had not been alone, and set it back with care. He looked at Olivia asleep under a blanket that had finally earned the name. He looked at Buddy heavier already, in the way of a creature that knows the bowl will not be empty. He looked at Sarah on the stair with the drawing soft at the corners from being held. The pattern had not only been paused, it had been named and stamped and taped to glass and carried into a room where ink weighs more than anger. Consequences were no longer an idea. They were a schedule. More days would come. Filings and hearings and men in suits who believed tone can outrun a docket. More windows at the diner. More coffee. More labels pressed flat with a thumb. Rest between. Breakfast after. Troy turned off the shop lights one by one so the room could keep its watch. The bay door breathed. The building settled. The chain held. He set the satchel by the door, the way a person sets boots, where they can be found in the dark if a phone rings again. He looked at grease and ink on his hands, and none of it felt like dirt. It felt like proof. Tomorrow, he said, not to anyone in particular, and to all of them at once. The room answered with small sounds that mean more than speeches, a child's even breath, a dog's content huff, paper cooling to the temperature of air, a lock set with care rather than fear, and the faint echo of a bell from a diner that had taught a town how to listen to documents as if they were voices. Morning came quiet, like a hand smoothing the wrinkles out of a map. The light did not demand anything of them. It just waited by the window until someone noticed. The shop smelled of oil and coffee and the faint sweetness of last night's crayon. Troy woke before the alarm, not because he had to, but because rest had finally kept its promise. He lay there for a moment, counting the stillness. No engines revving in anger outside, no trucks chircling, no phones ringing with bad news. The world had held its shape overnight. That was new. That was grace. Sarah sat on the stairs with a cup of coffee and the faint curve of a smile she had earned the hard way. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes alert. She looked like someone who had finally remembered her own rhythm. Upstairs, Olivia slept under the quilt, one arm around Buddy, who had decided the job of guardian could include napping. The dog snored once and shifted, satisfied. On the workbench, the satchel waited in its corner, patient and unafraid, like a soldier on furlough who knows the next call will come. Outside, the air felt rinsed clean. The morning was brighter than it needed to be. Rosie's diner was already open, the bell over the door ringing once, clean and clear. The corner booth looked exactly as it had the day before, as if time had taken a respectful step back. Rosie poured coffee before Troy even asked. Steam curled in lazy spirals. The smell of bacon filled the gaps where worry used to live. Tiny unfolded a newspaper but didn't read it. He just held it like proof that the day had continued. Doc wrote a few quiet notes in his small black book. Head tilted, mind already sorting the next steps. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. Words would have felt like decoration. The silence between them had texture now, the kind that means something has been built and tested and found strong. The investigator came by briefly, still in her work jacket, the badge clipped but quiet. She nodded once at Troy and said the filings were accepted without objection. The judge had signed the long-form order at dawn. Preservation requests had become production orders. Morrison and Pritchard were now names in official ink. She smiled, small and professional. Chain intact. She said, and left her empty cup turned upside down on the counter like a period at the end of a sentence. The officer came in not long after, ordered black coffee, and nothing else. He didn't talk about the case. He talked about the weather and how the river looked clearer after the storm. But when he left, he touched the brim of his cap to Sarah. It was not a salute. It was something quieter, recognition between people who had carried weight the right way. Back at the shop, the day bent toward ordinary work. Tiny took the ledger to the copy store where the machine stamped each page with its steady heartbeat thump. Doc replaced one bent clip and smiled at the sound of its click, the note of precision. Rev cleaned the rope, burning the frayed ends smooth. Maintenance was not busy work. It was worship. It was how the world stayed ready. Jake arrived in the afternoon, notebook in hand, camera zipped tight in its case. He did not film. He listened. He asked small, square questions and wrote down the answers without decoration. What time did the filing post? How many witness copies were verified? Did the court date hold? When Troy answered, Jake only nodded, as if acknowledging an oath had been spoken. The story was still alive, but now it could breathe on its own. At the courthouse, the notice had been pinned to a board where sunlight touched it through the glass. People stopped to read, one by one. Some nodded, some took pictures, some just stared. In Morrison's building across town, the receptionist had a new calm about her, shoulders loose, chin lifted. Behind her glass, Morrison and Pritchard moved in small, sharp circles, the kind that make no progress. Their phones lit their faces, and the light drained them pale. By evening, the chapter gathered again. The map on the table had changed, fewer red lines, more blue notes. The schedule was simple: testimony collection, file verification, follow-up with the investigator, witness comfort. Tiny had written those words in neat block letters, and under witness comfort he had listed 3 items: water, shares, a door that closes. Sarah traced her finger down the list and said she'd handle the door. She'd sand the frame if it stuck. Rev grinned. He said, "That's process." "Ma'am," she smiled back. "That's justice," he said, and they both laughed softly, like people laughing at a secret they'd earned. Olivia came downstairs holding her drawing, now with a small blue square in the corner. "What's that?" Troy asked. "The tape," she said simply. He nodded, and for the first time in days, he laughed with sound. Buddy wagged once, thumped his tail twice, a quiet metronome of peace. The phone rang later with a number from out of town. A reporter wanting a story full of tears and sound bites. Troy listened, said no politely, said they tell paper first, not people. "If you want the truth, film the board and the stamps," he said. "If you want emotion, look elsewhere." The voice on the other end hesitated, then said quietly, "We can hold that." He wrote maybe on the calendar and moved on. Dinner came from Rosie again, foil trays warm enough to fog the windows. They ate on the shop floor, backs against tires, legs stretched out. The food was good, the silence better. Jake stayed until the lights dim, then left without a word. Notebook closed. The investigator texted once, "Chain holds." The officer replied with a simple thumbs up. That was how gratitude looked when it came from people trained not to show much. Troy walked through the shop with slow steps, checking locks, switches, oil pans. The air was cooler now, smelling faintly of rain and steel. He paused by the satchel and opened it. 3 sleeves lay on top, edges neat, ink still dark. He did not count them. He only touched the corner of each page and whispered, "Thank you." Under his breath, a mechanic's prayer. He saw grease on his palms, a small line of ink across one knuckle. It looked like proof, not stain. Sarah came down the stairs, barefoot, mug in hand. The light behind her painted the edges of her hair gold. She said quietly that Michael's collections had been frozen, that the words "no longer at risk" were now written in the file. He nodded. She smiled, but it was the kind that comes after battle, not before. Then she looked at him for a long second and said, "We held, didn't we?" "We did," he said. "For now, and for real." Olivia slept again before the clock hit 10. Buddy was curled against her legs. The crayon she had used lay blunt and blue beside her hand. The house felt larger now, not because it had changed, but because fear had finally moved out. Rev checked the door twice. Tiny reset the alarm for dawn. Doc wrote one more note and left it on the workbench. Diner, courthouse, shop, like a rhythm, like a song. Troy turned off the lights one by one. The bay door sighed shut. The building settled. He looked at Sarah, then at the satchel by the door. "We hold the line and we hold each other," he said. She nodded. Not as surrender, not as defiance, but as agreement. It was a plan. The night grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that has been earned. A child breathed softly upstairs. A dog dreamed of open ground. Paper cooled to the temperature of the room. Somewhere across town, a light burned late behind Morrison's glass, the beginning of someone else's long night. Here, there was rest. Here, there was order. Here, there was proof. Tomorrow would come, as it always did, with work waiting, filings, follow-ups, more names to protect. But tonight, for the first time in months, they could believe that nothing had shifted under them in the dark. And that, Troy thought, was enough to begin again. In the end, this story isn't just about paperwork, injustice, or the noise of confrontation. It's about quiet courage. It's about the kind of bravery that doesn't come with applause but with endurance. When people like Troy, Sarah, and the others decided to hold the line, they showed that justice isn't born from anger. It's built from patience, truth, and the discipline to stay steady when the world shakes. The lesson is simple yet hard. Silence may feel safe, but it only protects what's wrong. Speaking up, even softly, can be an act of rebuilding. We all live in systems, families, workplaces, communities, where unfairness sometimes hides behind rules or reputation. But real gold fears no fire, and dignity tested by hardship only grows stronger. Standing up doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it means documenting, listening, or simply refusing to look away. The story reminds us that every small act of clarity, every time we tell the truth on record, pushes back against the weight of indifference. So, as you take this in, ask yourself, what lines in your own life are worth holding? Where might silence be costing you more than it protects? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections or similar stories in the comments. If this story spoke to you, hit like to help it reach others who might need a reminder that fairness is possible, and subscribe to stay close to more stories that test the soul and honor the human spirit. May your days ahead be steady, your nights quiet, and your heart at peace, because after all the noise, peace isn't the absence of struggle. It's the proof that you faced it and kept your light